Welcome, everyone, to Stepping Into Your Leadership. I'm your host, Courtney. Our goal here is to give you some actionable takeaways that will help you lead your teams. Thanks for joining us on this leadership journey. Let's get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Stepping Into Your Leadership. I've got two awesome goddesses in the studio today. Blonka Winkfield and Erika Petrelli are with us today, and we're going to have a different style episode today, in that there's going to be three of us talking, not just two of us, so three of us talking. But I thought it'd be fun because when I heard the word of the year this year, I was very interested in it and how that related to stepping into one's leadership. So just so you know, the word of the year is lots of dictionaries come up with it, right? It's like when radio stations do their songs of the year or whatever. They have to come up though with one word, and there are different ones for different dictionaries, right? They're competing, the dictionary is competing for top billing, and I'll tell you some of theirs offhand. So just so you guys know, we're going to focus on Merriam-Webster's dictionary word of the year, which is authentic. But Oxford Dictionary's word of the year, you ready for this? I thought this was so great. It's rizz, as in the slang word for charisma. The kids say it
that I hear out of my daughter's mouth
all the time. So rizz means you have style, charm, attractiveness, and so it's a slang word for. I love that Blonka looks surprised by that.
I'm guessing it took over swag, right?
Well, it's like the way you're rizzing on somebody is like you're getting their attention because you're showing your charisma. So it's a flirting,
sexual attractiveness a little bit.
Yeah. So it's how I'll be able to tell like who, what, where, like things are really popping.
How old are we right now?
I know.
We're so old, but look how fast slang changes, because your children are in their 20s and already like, you know what I mean? Like how fast slang words change. I'm so surprised that any dictionary would choose a slang word as a word of the year.
So Oxford Dictionary had rizz as their year of the word. We're not focused on that one, although it seems like it so far if you've tuned in. Cambridge Dictionary had hallucinate, which is interesting and random, right? Another one that I think it was dictionary.com. I can't remember. One of them had AI, or artificial intelligence. Makes sense, right? But I looked up the ways that Webster's, which is what we're focused on today, right? The Webster's Dictionary came up with authentic, is that they look at all the words that are searched the most, right? They take out words like love and affect versus effect. Those were the examples, because those apparently are looked up a ton every year, which I think is interesting, right? And then this year they had to take out a bunch of 5-letter words, because can anybody guess why they have to take out a bunch of 5-letter words?
No.
Wordle. So Wordle is so popular, and people are cheating on Wordle everywhere and looking up like, give me 5-letter words that start with, SL or whatever. And so that was skewing the results. What? So anyway, so once they took that out, they found on Webster's anyway, that authentic was one of the words that came up the most in searches. People were looking for that, right? So we'll talk about why you think that is in a minute, but I just wanted to give you the words of the year for last year and the year before. So, because it's interesting when you look at authentic being 2023, 2022 was gaslighting, right? Interesting. Then we went from gaslighting to authentic. And then 2021, did anybody have a guess at the word of the year from 2021? No looking it up, guys.
2021.
If you're out there, you can be thinking.
I guess would have something to do with like being in the house all the time.
Yeah.
Good one, Blonka. I like the way you're going. It was vaccine.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So there you go. So we went from vaccine to gaslighting to authentic. So when I heard authentic, I got kind of excited. And it seemed like a pretty positive spin on the word. So just so you know, they have like basically, a bunch of definitions when you look it up. And one of them is worthy of acceptance or belief, or conforming to based on fact. Like that's an authentic picture of society. That paints an authentic picture of society as the example. Another one is conforming to an original so as to reproduce essential features. So like authentic reproduction of this colonial farmhouse. One is made or done the same way as the original. Like this is an authentic Tahitian monument, whatever it is, right? Then there also could be, it's not false or imitation. It's real. It's actual, authentic, accent or whatever. And then true to one's own personality, spirit, or character is probably the way that in business we use those last two the most, right? Yes, Tatiana?
I've been getting so good about not jumping in, but just another way that authentic, but authenticate, right? There's so much AI being used out there. So like there's so much ways to authenticate. Is this picture real? Is this story real? Is this, so I wonder if authentic came up with that. Like, is this an authentic picture?
That is exactly why they think that it's coming up as much as it is because in reaction to AI so much. And also like the immersion of AI, which, seemed to, I know those people that are in that world, it's not been such a surprise as it is to the rest of us how big it's become. But they also think that it's then making everybody question, did you really write this? Are student papers really authentic? Like it's bringing up these kind of bigger questions. So, you could have a lot of teachers writing, is this an authentic piece? Is this authentic? Whatever. And then it also brings up like, what does that actually mean? Right. And what does authentic mean for the world that we live in now? So you're right, Tati. We thought this was going to be 3 of us in the studio, but it turns out it's 4 of us. We welcome you. All right. So with that idea of all of those definitions in terms of leadership and what we think it could mean, as we look back on this past year, what do you guys think? Any thoughts about it overall?
I mean, it's so interesting. The definition that you read had conforming in it a few times, conform or something. And it's so funny because I think of the opposite
yeah.
of that with authentic. Yeah, when it comes to authenticity, I think one of the things about being authentic is not feeling that you have to conform or not conforming to a place that's outside of who you genuinely are.
Mm-hmm.
The keeping it real, is it authentic? All of that is about, a very nonconformist kind of mindset.
Yeah, and it's true because there were 3 sections of that first definition, and they're all in that like comparing or based on something else, right?
Right.
Conforming to something that's actually a fact or out there, which probably is the AI version. And then the other 2, have to do with being real or actual or true to one's own personality, spirit, or character. The reason I brought Blonka and Erika on here today is because they're both leaders in our company, and I think in the world, but definitely in our company, and who I've worked with for a long time, but that they are also very good examples of 2 people who are very unique and authentic and have their own strong kind of personalities and character and the way that they attack leadership. And yet there's similarities in how we all do it, but there's differences in how authentic they are to who they are and how they manage and how they lead others. So, and how they live their lives. So that's, gives you a background of why you are chosen. But also, what does it mean for you? What do you think that it means in, like, if we look at it from not the first definition, but the ones about being true to your own personality? Why is that important, you think, in leadership?
Well, I was thinking when you asked the first question, as Blonka was talking about the conformity, how interesting. And actually, there's so many ways where the idea of authenticity can be tricky because we are taught, rightly so, this kind of fake it till you make it idea, where we step into the role that we imagine we will have, or we step into, we really try to like exude a confidence before it actually lives in us authentically. So we get really good advice to fake it till we make it. And how do we hold on to, at the same time, not being so faking it after we've made it that we forget to be authentically who we are. And so that's so interesting of at what point do we, because I know for myself in young leadership, and I see this happen in a lot of young leaders, is there's an inauthenticity just because they don't know any better yet. And so they prescribe to, well, this book said this is how I should do it. Or that one boss I had did it that way, so that's how I'll do it, and never sort of pausing in this kind of moment to say, is that actually authentic to the way I would do it, or is this actually getting the results I want? So I think it's a fascinating word, because there's so many moments and places where there's advice that makes sense, where it's a little bit flies in the face of authenticity, and then how do we swim through that to find what is authentically us? It's fascinating.
Yeah, I think with younger people too, like for me, authenticity speaks to one thing that a lot of young people haven't fully fleshed out, which is like, what are your personal values?
Yeah.
Like, if you're gonna, authenticity for me is like, what are my values? What do I stand on? What I wholly believe in that is mine? And that those values, 9 times out of 10, your values come from your experiences, good, bad, or indifferent. And so many young people, which leans into what you're saying, Erika, they're getting their values from other people at a young age. A lot of us do.
Yeah.
You're like, I should be really outraged at this thing that's happening because everybody else is. So I will be. Or I'm going to listen to this person because I watch their TikTok and that's what they say. So they haven't fleshed out their personal, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them haven't fleshed out their personal values really and truly for what makes sense for them. And they just kind of go along. And I think that's the hard part of them finding their authentic selves, as people like to say.
Yeah, it's a good point because, probably this has a lot to do with kind of the whole Instagram culture too, of like how life looks. And then like, what's the authentic story? You look at someone's travel pics.
The unfiltered story.
And my vacation looks fantastic when I post it. But then like when you talk to him afterwards, he looks like, oh, you had a great vacation. And people are like, oh, it was such a roller coaster. And you're like, really?
Yep.
Everyone was fighting and they were puking and, you didn't see what was at our ankles and off camera. We were at each other's throats right before the picture was snapped.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm sure with young people who have a lot of that pressure, more so than we do, even that idea of being authentic, like, wait, where do we start here? Do you remember like when in your career that you thought, okay, I can allow myself to let down that role that I'm playing a little bit? I mean, I think you're right, Erika. We step into it sometimes. We step back into it. But do you remember if there was a moment when you were like, okay, I'm just going to be me and this is who I am and people can take it or leave it, and it either worked out or didn't? Does anybody have a memory of that?
Isn't it funny that we're all pausing?
Because there's so many different things.
It could be little. It could be a little
for
moment.
For me, it's different in different ways. So I think when the job that I had before leadership, when I worked at the restaurant, I think I was pretty authentic to myself there. Like totally easy breezy. When I worked in a lab before that, definitely not. Like that was a whole fake it till you make it. Like, oh my God, all these people are so smart. Am I as smart as and you try to keep up with that. And so I think by the time I got to the restaurant, I was kind of like, this is a dumb job anyway, so I can be myself. I wasn't really thinking twice about that job. I was like, I'm the smartest kid in this room, so I get to be who I am, And then when I got to leadership, I think that's when I fully was able to go, okay, I get to be who I am. Like really, really get to be who I am on a daily basis. These people are great, and I think we did a good job creating that environment where people got to be kind of who they are and work on a daily basis. So I would say it wasn't until then, which is crazy because that's almost like my 30s, until I felt like I could be like super, super comfortable at work with intention.
Yeah.
Well, that's funny too, because I feel like I am now just in my 50s more authentic. Like if I look at 30s me, I'm like, oh, honey, you still had such a long way to go.
So much to prove.
Like 20s me, 30s me, 40s me. I mean, I feel like when if we're talking about real authenticity, kind of whole life authenticity, they're, you know, they always talk about kind of the gifts of aging. And I think authenticity is a gift that comes, that only gets seasoned as you live your life. And so for me, authenticity is still, I'm still cooking. I'm
Oh
still
yeah.
marinating,
Oh,
right?
without a doubt.
But I was better in my 30s than I was in my 20s. I was better in my 40s than I was in my 30s. And I do think a lot of that for me came from a letting go of trying to please
Hmm.
or make sure everyone approved, or Blonka wants that, so I'm going to do that. But Christine wants that, so I'm going to do that. But Tatiana wants that, so I'm going to do that. So that thing that I think happens to a lot of us is like just trying to tend to whoever and whatever is in front of us. We forget ourselves entirely in that kind of thought process. And so that's been a slow journey. And so that's why I think for me, I'm having a hard time coming up with this one moment in time when suddenly I was authentic when before I wasn't. It's just
Switch.
been a gradual settling in,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, what you made me think of is that kind of feeling of like, okay, who do they need me to be right now?
Hmm.
And how am I going to be that? Right. Rather than thinking kind of like, not even thinking it, just doing whatever needs to be done in my own way and trusting that I'm going to be what is required of the moment because it is who I am, and trusting that what I've done so far has gotten me there and so forth. And I think so much of it is just like letting things go, to your point. Like, just how do I, you mentioned it as seasoning, but I think, one moment for me was when I went to DC once for a big conference. And I've talked about this before. And I saw, what's his name from the Harlem Children's Zone, Jeffrey Canada, speak. And he was so powerful speaker. Oh my God. It was the first time I'd heard him live. I'd read his books, but I had seen him live, and he was what surprised me was how funny he was. And he was so charming and self-deprecating and funny. And he immediately had this whole audience engaged, right? And here he is, one of the biggest thinkers in education that was out there, and certainly someone that we had studied working in the education world for so long. And so then I was just like, this is great. And then the next person who came out, I think I told you, was a woman who came out, and she was just so concerned about looking good and being thought of as smart, that she was so boring. And she had all of her data, and it was just this big proof of like, listen to me, I know what I'm talking about. And I mean, now I have such empathy and such heart for her. But at the time, I was just annoyed, right? And it was really bothering me why I kind of like had this hate, this vitriolic kind of hate for her in this moment. And I had just come off of like the last speech loving him. And I thought, what's wrong with me that like, here I am, a woman in a leadership role. Why am I like hating on this woman in this leadership role and like applauding the man? Like, what's wrong with me, And then I realized that, of course, we hate what there's a little bit of us in there. And I looked at it and I went, oh my God, I probably would have done the same exact thing. I would have been so nervous getting up on that stage that I probably would have been proving to them the whole time that I know what I'm talking about, or I'm worthy of being here. Whereas he had no worries about that, right? And he was just there, and he was telling all these stories about how he messed up and how the failures they had along the way, right? Of this huge problem. He's clearly successful. He had nothing to prove. And there was probably more that she had to prove, so to speak. But it really left me. And for that whole couple of days, I was writing, journaling while I was in other workshops, thinking about this idea. And I thought, I need to change my leadership. I need to go back when I go back, and I'm going to make sure that every single time I'm up in front of people, I'm going to try to share something a little bit vulnerable, or a little bit uncomfortable for me, or a little bit not perfect, or a little bit, raw, something, or funny, or just like whoever I am, and stop worrying about trying to prove that I deserve to be there and being too perfect. And I had immediate effects that were positive. It was felt scary, and I kept trying to talk myself out of it. But immediately I tried it at one of our all hands meetings that we call popcorn. And I tried it with a story that I told. And then immediately people were responding. People were coming up to me and saying things. And I thought, okay, this is working. Okay, baby steps. Okay. Can I try it again? Can I try it here? Can I try to go into our executive team meeting and say, guys, I'm totally lost. I don't know what I'm doing. And then you guys rising to the occasion to help me whenever that happens, and just having the guts to be like, okay, that's authentically the situation I'm in right now. You can't always do that. And I know people will tell me, and we work in a lot of corporate America. We work with a lot of people, a lot of companies, and they'll be like, Chrissy, we can't do that. And I'll be like, well, okay, but maybe you could do it. There could be partially you could do it, and you could figure out when is the right place and right time.
Well, it's so funny, Christine. I had such a similar experience. I was attending a conference called Story, the Story Gathering, which is a conference of storytellers from all industries. But there was a woman who came on the stage, and precisely what you described, I experienced, because she's a young woman, beautiful, dressed exquisitely, and she starts telling the story of how successful she became so quickly, like as a young person, right? How rich, how everything. And I was like, I could not have liked her less. I found myself bristling. And this brilliant woman, like 5 minutes into her story, is like, and then I woke up in a mental hospital, and proceeds to tell the story of how all of this projected success and brilliance landed her into her own kind of unraveling. And her actual speech was all the things she learned from like coming to pieces and then putting herself back together again. And same as your experience with Jeffrey Canada was the audience. I don't know if the audience was feeling what I was feeling when she was sharing her successes. I'm sure a lot of people were quite happy to hear about her successes, but when she talked about when she became vulnerable and actually shared her authentic journey of what she thought she should be, what happened, and then what she is now, which was a total transformation. It was a human story. You could have heard a pin drop, And so I do think, to your naysayers who say, well, I'm not going to walk into every staff meeting and share a vulnerable story or lead with my mistakes. I think that misses the message of, sure, you don't necessarily need to lead with your vulnerabilities, but simultaneously, you don't need to lead with all your brilliant successes. You don't need to come armed for the fight that you've imagined in your head. A lot of times I think people show up to the room armed for the fight of, I got to prove my worth. So here's the data that shows that I'm worth it, as opposed to just being in the room and being worth it,
Exactly. And I think it depends on the situation that you're in, right? Like Blonka, I thought you had a good point of like, what happened at the lab when you worked in science, right? Or when compared to when you were in the restaurant or when you came to leadership and we're talking about this stuff all the time. But like, I think too, like if I go see a big client, and I don't know who they are, do I have the guts to keep a little bit of my authentic self there, or am I going to just be trying to prove it? Right. And I keep trying to figure out that as we go, like how to make sure that I'm still me in this right situation. But it can be different where you have to fit into different groups.
It's huge. I mean, it's so very, very different. And I think for me as a Black woman, that's always the thing. Like you walk into a room and what are you going to lead with? Like how authentically me, am I going to be? And then even I am from the South. However, I've spent most of my adult life in New York. I am now a New Yorker in every sense of the word. Thought I was a New Yorker, even though, I just come from Georgia. But being here in the South, I'm mindful of my New Yorkness. Like how authentically, New York am I going to be when I walk into a Southern room? Like, cause, New Yorkers can be kind of like snotty, like, oh, that's like, oh God, what's that? And so I have to be mindful of that. Like, am I going to go with, all right, this is not my cup of tea because it's a very Southern thing, or do I dial all that back and just go with the flow and like, yay, I'm in here, so just like all kinds of little things that are, because we're so many things. We're so many things, we're Southern, we're women, we're this ethnicity, we're all these things. We are authentically all of those things. And everywhere you go, I think on a daily basis, you have to think, how much of that am I bringing into this room? What is it serving? What is it not serving? Me bringing all of that in this room, and how do I continue to do that and still keep hold of myself? How much do I lean back, lean into myself, or how much do I lean outside of who I am? It's a hard question.
It is hard. Do you find that you do that still all the time? Like
everywhere I go, all day long. Like it is a very difficult thing sometimes. Like with my family, me being gay. Oh, I'll tell you, I lean very far away from that when I'm at family functions and I'm alone. If I'm with my wife, then that's a different thing, but I don't talk about it. You know what I'm saying? And not hiding it, but I know in this setting, I don't know what that's going to serve me. So I will say, I do drop that authentic part of myself down a little bit,
Yeah.
It's
a
Well,
good example.
that is an interesting. What Blanca's bringing up is that idea of the difference between being authentically who we are is not the same thing as sharing everything about ourselves to every person in every room.
Exactly.
I can be authentic. That doesn't mean you get to know every piece of me. That's not the same thing. And that's probably a misstep that some people make in the name of authenticity, is this idea of here's all my cards on the table. You get the whole deck, right?
Right.
Yep.
Like choosing when and where to share parts of ourselves is strategic. That's not the same as being inauthentic necessarily.
Yes. Yeah.
And I feel the same that goes
tricky
along with
business.
that.
It's tricky.
What goes along with that, Erika, you're so right, is also, which drives me insane, the people who are just rude for authenticity's purpose.
Right. You're like, I'm authentic. You're like, no, you're just an asshole.
You're just an ass. Like, let's be clear. You know what I'm saying? Like,
you don't get to get away with that.
I don't like da-da-da-da-da, and they're just going to but it's like, but that's not necessarily being authentic. You don't have to say every negative thought about everything that you want to say in the lane of being authentic.
Right. Doesn't give you permission to.
Right.
To
Yeah.
just
To be a
whatever.
jerk all the time,
Yeah.
to be an ass all the time because you're being authentic. Just, like I will say, I'm going to speak my mind, and everybody should be free to speak their mind. But really, what is it at the cost of? And how does it impact others?
Right. You still be kind and
yes,
respectful, diplomatic. Yes. You can still think, is now the right moment? Is this the right person?
Exactly. As you were saying, you don't have to put all your cards on the table in that moment if it doesn't necessarily serve a true purpose. It doesn't have to be that way. But I think a lot of one of the negatives that I found, like in my kids' peer group, they just are vitriolic and they'll say whatever they feel because it's authentic, because I'm being true to me.
Oh, wow.
And it doesn't matter if
you do you.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't matter if it hurts your feelings. I'm sorry I hurt your feelings, but I'm just saying that's just how I feel.
Oh, wow.
And it's like,
yeah. That's an interesting thing to bring up, because your kids are in their 20s, right? And they're in the workforce. And like, this is something that we as leaders in the workforce need to understand where they're coming from.
Yep.
There is an advocacy part of like self-advocacy that is much stronger with these younger generations than probably, honestly, because parenting was more empowering than how we were parented,
some snacks were left out in the yard for us.
You're left to fend for yourself and never talk while adults are talking, or be in the room while adults are talking. So,
and don't come inside until it's dark out. What?
Can you think of some leaders today that are kind of known for being authentic, or ones that you would say, oh yeah?
Well, like Brené Brown.
Yeah,
she's iconic in terms of pushing us all to think about what does authenticity mean for ourselves. She's the first person that popped into my head. Who were you going to say?
Mine was Susie Orman, because
oh my gosh,
wow. It's very interesting because she says so much stuff that's really unpopular.
Yeah.
Like, let your kids pay for their own college. Like, there's so many things. And I think as like a financial guru, she's being very authentic to the information that she has and what she's trying to say. But it's oftentimes really unpopular. People are like, that's crazy. Why would she say that? But she's very authentic to what she believes in, her mission, and, what she's trying to put out there in the world.
Yeah, that's a good one. I wouldn't have thought of that. And her kind of, she's from Chicago, right? She has like kind of a Chicago. She's,
Just kind of brassy chick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love your example, and Brené Brown is the same way. That there is something. If we would start to think back on the things that we've said in our conversation, if we could come up with like key elements, one key element is consistency, right? So something that happens in inauthenticity is in the name of trying to be popular or be liked or fit into the room that I'm in. I'm very inconsistent because I'm going to morph so dramatically to fit the moment. That's inauthentic. Whereas Susie Orman, she is, like her or don't like her. Brené Brown, same way. Those two are consistent in their message. it doesn't matter who they're talking to. It's going to come down to these same, you started with this, their core values.
Yep.
So they might be popular, they might not be popular. In this room it might work, in that room it might not work, but they're consistent, which is a big part of their authenticity, I think.
Yeah. Yep. Even like Glennon Doyle and Abby Wambach, their relationship and like watching that, and you see them in different aspects, and you feel like you're really sitting down with this couple, know, and like seeing their world.
I agree. That's another good example, and real
consistent. And I think, Brene Brown is I think you're right. And that she talks about this a lot, but I also think, to your point earlier, Blonka, about how it doesn't give you an excuse to be a jerk. And there's something about the word authentic or authenticity to me that also means like kind of your true self, your more wiser self, your deeper self, so that sometimes that self might be very, very quiet, might be a very good listener, might know that the moment needs someone else's voice. And I think that does take a little while to get to know, because I think sometimes people think, okay, I'm going to be an authentic leader, and it's like a coat you put on, which is the opposite, right, of authentic.
Right.
But that it's somehow, okay, if I'm going to be authentic and I really feel angry, or I really feel like I hate this person and I want to tell them that, and that's authentic, to go, wait a minute, is that my wise self talking, or is that just, some sort of defense or something that can make me, I need to sit with this a little longer before I bring that out, because that might be way more about me than it is about that person needing to hear that. And I think as leaders, that's really important.
And it's what's serving you in this moment. That's another big thing. Like, not just serving you, but serving the community that you're in, whether it's a meeting or whatever it is. How well does that serve you, being, your, in air quotes, authentic self in that way?
Yeah.
Because that's another thing that's like, when you come to your values, if your value is, say, I value peace, I value harmony, I value getting along with others, I value, then that kind of conflicts with that a little bit. In that moment, it might.
I value peace. Let me give you a piece of my mind.
Exactly. Because I authentically think this,
Namaste's on your wall as you're like cursing out.
Well, that's a perfect example. Like, I was with somebody who was talking about their leader, and like talk about it inauthentic. And I will refrain, because this is someone who is very well known, who their leader of their organization has exactly that, Erika, like namaste, or like, some sort of spiritual Buddhist thing on their wall. I don't know exactly what it was, but then would come out at random times with like a samurai sword into the thing and just start like wielding it around. So to the point where everyone was like, what? And thinking that was really fun and authentic and, interesting, but really was just kind of scary and like unhinged.
Weird.
It's kind of scary
and weird.
So,
because it's too opposing. Like we're all made up of a tapestry of different hobbies and interests and likes, but that's opposing forces right there. And so that's a person that's playing a part with the signs on their wall, but showing their true colors by wielding the sword.
Yeah.
So it'd be better if they had swords all over their office, because then the staff would be like, oh yeah, that coop, is a warrior.
Get your shield ready.
Give them the art of war for Christmas. Like, at least we know what we're dealing with, not, the Buddhist way.
Right. So I think we shift now, to some things that people can do, right? So the hard part about authenticity is that it's often, like you said, something you age into, or something that, although I don't know, I look at sometimes in many ways, I think you guys could probably say this too, but I think my kids are a little more authentic than I was at their age.
Oh, for sure.
To who they are. But, I think there's things that kind of just come with experience, and you learn it. But I also think there are things you can work on, right? We believe in learning and leading and learning and leading again and trying things. So I think one of the things you mentioned already was staying true to. So if you're one thing here, you're one thing there. How you are, with your friends is how you're going to be with people that work with you. I mean, you're going to have different boundaries and so forth, but you're not a different person at work than you are everywhere else. I think that's one thing. You have consistency. You mentioned, Erika, in your words and your actions, right? So you're not saying one thing and doing totally another all the time. How to have honest communication that's also kind and thoughtful, and not shying away from vulnerability, which I do think is a big one that certainly Brene Brown talked about a lot. And saying like, one of the moments that you can dip into vulnerability. And some people will say, this is not safe here. And that may be true. In some places, you just can't be. But hopefully you can find a place where you can be, because that's really bringing your whole self to work. And I don't want to work somewhere where I can only bring part of myself. So we try to create workplaces or help employers create workplaces where people can bring their whole selves to work, because then they're going to be working a lot harder and being more productive and come up with more innovative ideas and so forth. But that takes trust and takes some building, right? But what else can people do to practice and getting into that authentic self more? Any ideas?
I mean, I think one of the other things that's really about being authentic and being that thing is taking responsibility for your actions. That's another big one. Like taking responsibility for your actions, your thoughts, your words, all of that. For me, that's a very big part of authenticity. Like, how am I showing up authentically for my friends and my family? And that's by like things, keeping promises, making sure that, we can't keep every single promise, but staying true to your word. And things go left, taking responsibility for those things when that happens.
Yeah, saying, I'm sorry, I messed this up. So hard.
Can I just tell you this little story, a real quick story?
Yes,
So
I love a story.
I was with my goddaughter, who's 10 years old, the other day, and we were shopping because once a year we go. That's my Christmas gift to her. I take her shopping. I'm the little godmother.
Auntie
Yeah,
Mames.
so she loves it. And so we're in the car, and she's singing. And before I even realize it, I was like, "Oh my God, Amanda, you sound horrible." Because it was awful. Like, it was like
Killer
the
of dreams.
absolute worst thing I'd ever heard. I was like, what is that? Like, it sounded like a chicken. And, it just came out of my mouth before I could even say it. Because we've been laughing and joking, And she goes, do I really sound bad? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, and then what I said in the moment was, I can't sing either, is what I said. And she was like, oh, man. And then we just continued talking. So before she got out of the car, so we shop all day. And before she gets out of the car, I'm like, Amanda, I have to tell you, I have to apologize for what I said earlier about you not being a good singer. And I had to go back and apologize because I know for her, I'm like this really cool aunt person, and I know for me, one of the things that I value is being that in her life, and I want to have her to know that that is something that I value and I care about her. And I was like, that's a horrible thing to say. So I had to take responsibility for my actions. I could have just blown it off and be like, really, do I have to apologize to a 10-year-old? Whatever. She sounded horrible. I meant it.
For the truth.
Yeah, exactly. I meant it. But I was like, no, I had to go back and, be held accountable for saying something mean to a 10-year-old that you didn't really, it's a very small thing, but it was a thing that actually, and that's how I know that it's a value to me. It gnawed on me like the whole rest of the day. It was kind of gnawing at me like, oh my God, you said that to her. That's awful,
What a beautiful thing. What a beautiful example of going back and, owning a moment where you didn't show up as your best self. Like you could have easily, like you said, you could have easily blown it off. But so the authenticity of understanding our impact and that you impacted her in a way that was negative, and that certainly would never have been your intention.
Never my intention.
And because you made such a good point that so often we're like, what's the big deal? I mean, that's not a big thing. It was just her singing voice, which is clearly terrible. But like, it doesn't matter how little you think the thing is, that sort of authentic owning your impact, which is what you did.
I love that.
Oh, I was going to say it's almost in some ways a little bit the flip side of that, because yours is so much about understanding our impact and really seeing when we have an unintended effect and really owning that. I was going to say on the opposite side, so much of inauthenticity comes from being scared that we don't have any impact. So like getting a bullhorn and like trying to shout, look at me, I matter. And so it's a way too woo-woo. Like it's not an actionable tip, but the tip is know your worth.
Yeah.
Really, really trying to believe in yourself helps us. It helps us be authentic if we can somehow find a way to believe in our worth. So however people do that, maybe that's a second podcast.
No,
whether it's mantras, whatever it is, but like how you figure that out is a huge key to authenticity, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think knowing your impact, knowing your worth, two things you brought up. I think it, just to set it in place again, admitting those mistakes are huge and learning from them. So you're not having to counter the same thing every time, right? So that so people see you God, it makes such a difference. I hear so many stories of like positive leadership of people sharing like, oh, my boss, yeah, he'll come to me and he'll say when he made a mistake, and I really appreciate that. Like that sometimes is more powerful than people who don't make any mistakes, you know?
Oh yeah.
Because it's inauthentic, because
Yeah.
there's no way they don't make mistakes.
There's
So
no
you're
way.
distrusting of them.
Yeah. And sometimes I love what you said, Blonka. Like you almost think, and this is what I think in the workplace sometimes, like I'll know like, oh, I made a mistake there. And then I'll think, well, I'm not going to say anything because then maybe they'll notice that I made the mistake as if I'm getting over on them. Right.
Right. Exactly.
As if you didn't hurt them the first
Right.
time.
Now I'm just going to keep going so that maybe we're both in this pact not to say anything. Right. And I can feel better about myself. Yeah. The other thing is something that we teach a lot, and sometimes we take it for granted, is active listening. Like, how well are you actively listening to somebody? So it's not just being authentic in your words and what you say, but also in how you listen. Because it's a lot easier for you to be authentic if you can actually listen to someone else. You can bear witness to someone. So like at active listening, we also, part of that is listening to what the person has to say, asking them questions when they're done that have to do like clarifying, did I hear this right, whatever. Then saying back to them, like, I heard you feeling this way. Is that true? Is that accurate? And then they can say, oh, no, that's not what I meant. Or they can kind of clarify that a little bit. But then they really feel heard. And once people feel heard, they report time and time again that they work for an authentic leader just based on the fact that person is doing a really good job of listening and letting them know that they're listening to them. It's an art, and it's going to be clunky at first, and you may think like, this is weird, but a lot of people think they're good listeners and they're not, so it's worth practicing through a process.
Yeah.
Anything else that you guys can think of that could help folks as we wrap up?
Well, just to echo what you just finished saying, that there really is this, it's sort of authenticity equals being a human. And so understanding that being a human means sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong. Sometimes you say the right thing, sometimes you say the worst thing, sometimes you forget to show up, all of the above. And so just again, I feel like, so if people listening to this are just starting their leadership journey, I hope they're listening very actively, because I think at the very start of the leadership journey is when we feel like we do have to use the reference of like putting on this cloak, right? I have to put on this cloak of leader, and it looks like A, B, and C. And so I think just to really echo this point of, I'm authentic if I'm really stepping into my humanity,
which is everyone, as you said. And I think to add on to what Erica is saying is like the other great thing about being authentic is you get to build like really rich relationships, because the relationships you build, particularly at work and, in life, is, they're built on real things. They're built on trust. If you are your authentic self, then that person really knows you. That relationship is built actually on a firm foundation. It's not built on, oh, Erica told me she liked this, but she really didn't mean it. So I'm buying Erica things she doesn't even like. Or, you know what I mean? Like, so when you're being your authentic self, people really get to know you and they get to trust in that relationship, which only deepens relationships, whether they're work or personal. And that, I think helps people in general build these very strong bonds that make everything around them, their teams, their families, just deeper and richer in general.
I love that. Also, just to give a plug to some other episodes that we have coming out, but it will be, really on this idea of knowing yourself a little more. Like self-knowledge is helpful in authenticity, because then and there's a lot of self-assessments that we take groups through. So like we've done it ourselves, whether it's probably the most ubiquitous one is the Myers-Briggs assessment. There's also, and that's, the most typical thing people know. Are you an introvert, extrovert, those types of things. The other one is that Erika does a lot with folks is the DISC personality assessment. There's also the 6 types of working genius. We do a social styles and versatility one. All of those, what we find happen is that people have aha moments of like, oh, this thing that I thought was just quirky about myself is actually an important part of myself. And if I can step into that in when is the right time, I can be brilliant. And if I know to step back from it sometimes when it's time for Blonka's genius to come out, or her personality is needed more in this moment, or this is the time for Erika, then we can all kind of be doing this all the time and using our authentic selves in the best possible moment. And so that, I think those things can be helpful too, as a shameless plug. So listen to those episodes if you're interested in.
Listen to every podcast.
Listening to those episodes if you want more of that. But I do think that has helped folks. We get a lot of positive feedback, but it also will, in our own company, when we've done it, I've had people realize some of the things about themselves that are really unique and help them, in this idea of what's my style of leadership and how do I have an authentic style of leadership. Well, then there's going to be a million different leaderships because there's a million yous out there. So anyway, with that in mind, thank you, Erika and Blonka, and Tatiana, who piped in. Thank you so much for coming today. And as always, we could chat about this for hours. So thank you guys for listening, and feel free to give us your notes on what you think could help folks with their authenticity and embracing that word of the year that we just had.
Oh, yeah. All right. Get your Riz on.
Bet.
We'll catch up one day. We'll catch up. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I'd like to give a special shout out to our podcast producer, Richard Francisco. Check out our notes for any details. And if you get anything out of this, please follow us. And if you enjoy it, please take a moment to rate us or write a comment. It will mean the world to us. We'd love to hear from you. And if you just can't get enough, follow me on TikTok and check out tlpnyc.com/podcast for more information.